Hello and welcome back to another Warlords of Draenor video. This time we are going to be looking at the Skyreach dungeon. This is on normal mode, however, the shooting of it feels more in between a normal and a heroic than just being a normal. Now the instance itself is really fun. I think the bosses for the most part have interesting mechanics, bar the third one, and overall I had a pretty good time. Now while we didn't completely actually kill the last boss, we got lots of attempts in, so I can definitely show you every mechanic there. I just actually have not been in a group that has killed that boss. Now one thing I just want to say before we get into the video is that if you look at the 4 space on my keybinds, you'll notice that Glaive Toss isn't there. Of course 4 is where I put Glaive Toss. I can only hypothesize it because I've been up for like 20 hours and this footage was recorded, and I was messing around with my talents a lot. I just forgot to put it back in. So that's unfortunate, but it didn't seem to hold us up too much. Our problems with the final boss were, I think, not really related to the little bit of DPS that lost. Anyway, so let's get into the main video. Now, starting off with the trash at the very beginning of this instance, well, it's okay. Basically, you've got 2 different kinds of mobs. There's one that will charge people, dealing, I think it's about 60-something thousand damage, so that's definitely something that you want to kill. And then there is also a mob which heals. Now, this was one of the very first attempts we had in here. It just turned out that this was actually my best run of Skyreach. So I was trying, I think, once I noticed it, to interrupt the heal, but the healers were going off very fast, and honestly, they were healing far more than I could interrupt, because of course hunters have only got one 24-second cooldown thing, and it's not like a good binding shot to stun them or anything, so whatever. That was the initial plan for me, but look, at the end of the day, I think we just DPS'd them all down, and it ended up working out just fine. I also believe I changed talents here from focusing shot to something else because it was just a little bit more comfortable. And, oh, as well with the whole being up for 20 hours thing, probably not that good with my mastery uptime. So yeah, it's a little bit flawed, this footage, but at least we get to see all the awesome mechanics for the bosses. And speaking of bosses, let's move on to the very first boss. So this boss is actually a ton of fun. Now, there are a few abilities in the dungeon journal that he didn't seem to be doing at the minute. I don't know if those are maybe heroic only abilities, but they were in the dungeon journal listed as normal. Anyway, so that first one he did there was Skywall. He basically throws that chakram at you, and then this thing appears, and it starts spinning around. You don't want to hit it. At one stage of this fight, I do end up running through one, which was of course a terrible idea, but it only did like 10 or 20k damage. So it wasn't particularly bad. I think I was trying to like finish off a focusing shot or something insanely newbie like that. Anyway, so then he does this, which just means that you have another thing to dodge. And yeah, I mean, from a movement perspective, it's pretty fun. That's the time. I took 53k damage, so definitely not something you want to do. On hindsight, focus shot, which requires you to be standing still, definitely not the ideal thing to take in this fight. And in fact, mastery, or the mastery for the marksmanship hunter does involve standing still, so maybe not the best combination. Oh, plus my focus management is just terrible. I think this is one of my first times actually using focus shot, like, properly as a hunter. Ah, jeez. Anyway, so that's basically it for the fight. The other thing that he does is he charges people. And that does, yeah, I think, well, it went through me and it did 89k, so it's painful enough. And then there's another thing which he is supposed to do, but I just didn't see here. And basically the final boss shoots one of the players with a beam of light, which lights them on fire and does a dot. And then there's another thing he does, which apparently is supposed to send out a fan of blades, and that also puts a dot on you. So it seemed a little bit like the thingy from Ji-Kun in Throne of Thunder, where he sends out all his quills out. But, well, I mean, like that does a dot, but this just wasn't the case. So overall, I've got to say, this boss, in its current incarnation, is very easy for skilled players, or even, I guess, just decent enough players in terms of the boss mechanics. However, the other groups that I've had for this dungeon have basically wiped here about 2 or 3 times before killing it, which was very unfortunate, so I don't really know what the overall difficulty of this is like. I guess it just depends on the people that you're with. Alright, so with that boss dead, let's move on to the trash. Now, this trash is kind of interesting that you've got 2 different packs and then this big Raven dude. The Raven patrols so he can pull him on his own, and you basically need to because it does this charge attack, which really hurts. And I think its basic, like, peck attack hits for a good few, or tens of thousands of damage. Maybe it's 50 or 60, at least on my male hunter. So it's definitely pretty painful, and you don't want to get killed by him. Therefore, pull it on its own and just deal with it that way. And then for the pack after that, we basically just decided to kill the golems first. That's because the golems do some sort of like buff to the other guys, so it just made sense to kill them. But really, the trash wasn't particularly problematic once we got a bit of a strategy down with it. It's the sort of thing with the trash in this instance that there isn't a great deal of it, but sometimes there are mechanics you just have to pay attention to. Oh, and this one's also got the guys which do the rushing attack, basically the charge that hits you and does a decent enough chunk of damage, so you definitely have to keep your sort of wits about you for the trash in here. Alright then, so let's move on to the next boss. Now this guy's actually a really interesting fight, and maybe it could do with one or two more things going on, but at its base it is quite cool. So the first ability isn't that really major, basically it's just that tank smash that he did, so if you're standing behind the tank you'll be hit by that. Now you can see I'm standing in a beam at the minute. That beam does 10,000 base damage to me per second, but if that hits the boss, it will start to heal him for 2% of his health per second. Now the reason I stepped out of that beam is, well, because I took 70-something thousand damage from his other ability, but it ended up hitting that other guy, and whatever, he was able to deal with it. Now he's got this ability called Burst, and Burst will deal a lot of damage to everyone in the room. It says in the dungeon journal it's only people who get close, when it's just, for the short version of the fight, but when you actually look at the ability in the dungeon journal, it is within 100 yards, which I'd assume covers the entire room. Now that hits you for a lot of damage, and if you're soaking up a beam and then you have to deal with Burst, you're going to run into some problems. Because if you take 80k damage while you don't have 80k health, then you're in with a bit of a problem, so you need to time your beam soaking to ensure that you never really go under 80k health, which can be problematic, or at least just time things right in relation to when Burst is going to come off cooldown. Now the boss itself does actually have a decent amount of HP, which I think means even more that getting healed by 2% per tick is extremely bad. Right now, I think I was just in this side of the room, I decided I'd kind of take this little quadrant, but there weren't many beams coming, they were sort of hitting other people, and I didn't really want to abandon my post. And there we go, I got one now. So you can see you take a decent little bit of damage. I ended up using deterrence there because it's got a bit of a latent damage decrease to it. Or at least, if I had it glyphed, it would. I don't know if I have the deterrence glyph that decreases your damage taken. Anyway, so whatever. The boss itself's pretty fun. It just feels like it could do with one or two more mechanics. Because really right now, it's just those three. And while you do have some gameplay, and just involving balancing your health and stuff, it's really just that. Now, I think the heroic mode of this fight could be really interesting. I understand that for the normal one, they just need to keep it mechanically simple. But for the heroic fight, they could do a lot of interesting stuff, with all that, gameplay surrounding managing the timing of your health, bursts, soaking the beams, maybe if they added one or two more things, it could be really fun. So overall, this is fundamentally a really solid and enjoyable fight. Okay then, time to deal with the third boss. Now, I don't know why, but this one just didn't really rub off too well on me. So the main thing that it's got for the tanks is this ability called Pierce Armor. Now, Pierced Armor will essentially hit the tank, and it will cause them to take 10% more damage from Pierced Armor on every single application. So that obviously is not a very good thing. Now, what can happen here is that if you have your active mitigation up as a tank, Pierced Armor will not affect you. So essentially what you want to do is ensure that every time the boss is going to cast Pierce Armor on you, that you have some sort of active mitigation up, which I think does work out quite well, though the tanks that I've talked to said that it was a rather annoying mechanic, so I'm not 100% sure what to say about that. I don't really main a tank. Now, the other thing that this guy does is a whole bunch of solar flares, which are really just these birds. So there are piles of ash on the room, and every once in a while he will reanimate one of them. And they of course get reanimated as one of these little bird things. Now that bird will fixate on a player, and if it goes into that player, it explodes for 90,000 damage to everything within 10 yards of it. But if another solar flare is within 10 yards of that, then it will activate another pile of ash, and then it will activate that ash into another solar flare, and you get into this situation where, as we had, where you have two of them up, and that certainly is not something that you want to happen. And now he does have this thing, which is called Screech. Now this does 10,000 DPS to everyone, and that only happens if he's not engaged in melee combat, and it also ignores line of sight. So basically, if no one is in melee with the boss, i.e. if the tank isn't there, it starts to damage everyone. I'm guessing that's just because this is a boss which is not supposed to move. Like, you know, it's just supposed to be in a fixed position. Anyway, so this ended up being a bit of a long fight because we were still working and managing things. I still wasn't really sure what I was doing. Another thing you'll notice is that I moved back to using steady shot. And the reason I did that is because, honestly, my focus management at that stage with focusing shot was absolutely abysmal. I was used to sort of hitting the 2 button in the timings that I would with steady shot, but with focusing shot, that just messed things up. Of course, my mastery, you know, uptime here is still pretty bad, but whatever, I just thought it was worth explaining that for some reason. Anyway, let's move on to the next trash. Now, before we actually get onto the trash, there's this really annoying sky bridge, and I get the mechanic that Blizzard was going with here. They just wanted you to move around it in some sort of way so you didn't get blown off the bridge, but it is not fun at all. All it does is slow you down, and it doesn't deactivate at the end, meaning for wipes, you've got to redo this stupid sky bridge again and again. It's terrible. Look, Blizzard, you can either put a lever at the end to turn it off, or ideally, you could just remove it because it's a bad idea. Now, as for the rest of the trash, let's get on to the actual trash. So, we basically just started attacking the golems that were here, and we decided they were the things to kill first, especially that big golem. That's what we had done earlier, and it seemed to work out then, so that was fine. But then we also found there was this caster guy who was being empowered by these like little small golems, so we ended up killing the caster first, then the golem, and overall it worked out fine. We probably could have done this pack a little bit better, but hey, whatever, at the end of the day, it was killed, and none of us died, so that was fine. The next guy that we faced was this big golem thingy. Now, he only really had 2 abilities. The first one was a beam. That beam hit me. It was dealing about 14,000 damage a second, so, you know, just had to survive through that. Then he also does a thing called Smash, which just hits the ground. I think it does a base of 50,000 damage to everyone, so it's really just a matter of killing this guy before the healer runs out of mana or something like that. Now, we did have multiple health bars, but he also had a shared health pool, so it was really just a matter of AoEing the guy down, and that was fine, you know, trash dead. So let's move on to the final boss. Alright then, let's move on to the final boss. So this guy is honestly, like, this part of the video is fit for purpose because we didn't actually get him killed. He has a few abilities himself, but the main mechanics come from the ads. So he's got this ability called Lens Flare. You'll see that come up in a second or two. Basically, it's just this big beam of fire that will follow a player and, you know, it just puts fire on the floor. That's fine, but unfortunately I think there was at least one of the attempts we were doing where one of the guys sort of pulled it through the group, which wasn't too good. Now, you've just saw an ad come in there. That ad will temporarily, well, not temporarily, it'll, you know, just flat out fly in. It'll pick one of your players up, and it'll try to drop them off the, you know, off the platform, a little bit like the Valkyr from Lich King. In fact, exactly like the Valkyr from Lich King. So all you have to do is just kill it. Now, at this point, I was just sort of wondering, wow, I'm not doing any damage to the boss, and then I noticed that there was this shielding ad, and I don't know how long it took me to switch over to him. Yeah, there we go, now I switched. So you want to kill that to take the shield down. And that's basically it. The only other thing that the boss does is an ability called, I believe, Solar Burst, which does 50,000 damage to a player, but it will also, of course, you know, it's interruptible, so you can avoid that. Now, at this point, our fight was going to pieces. We just, yeah, it was messy. I was trying to kill this zealot. Of course, the shielding mob was nearly dead, so we would have been able to attack the boss very soon, but the way I saw it, well, I need to kill the zealot guy, right? Because if the, you know, if the boss is damageable or not, it doesn't matter if we lose players. But eventually we died, and this is basically as far as we were able to get before the group fell apart. And I unfortunately have not been able to find another group that's got back here. I've spent about 4 or 5 hours, not more than 4 or 5 hours, geez, more like 6 hours trying to get groups for here. I've been spamming that dungeon queue, just trying to get something going, and every single group seems to fall apart, mainly before the second boss. In fact, I've had about 3 fall apart at the first boss, and most of the rest of them at the second. I haven't even got back to the third boss properly, so I suppose that really just means that if you follow the mechanics, you'll be fine, and if you don't, you're actually going to be punished, which really is a very good step up from how things were in Mists of Pandaria. Also, I should probably just say sorry for my crappy hunter play. As I said, you know, I was up for like 20 hours, these betas come out, or at least the new builds come out at like 4 AM for us people in the UK, and I wanted to get just right into those dungeons because I was really hyped about them, and sure, they were fun, but goddamn, just watching my play now, it's kind of painful. So yeah, that's what's going on there. Still, the hunter's a lot of fun, the dungeon's a lot of fun, and right now I've got the exact opposite problem because I slept for 12 hours straight, and now I'm terribly overslept, and I feel really woozy, so really, it's all fantastic. Blizzard, what are you doing to me? Anyway, that's it for the video, so leave any comments or anything like that, and in the description you can subscribe, like, favorite, and all those great things, and I will see you next time.